Hello everyone, welcome to Tutor Tuesday. My name is Dan from Dan's Test Prep, and today I'm going to be going over some digital SAT practice questions. What I've got for you guys today is some reading and writing as well as some math questions. And if you want to see more stuff like this, definitely check me out at explore.danstestprep.com. Let's get right into it. All right, so our first question here looks like a nice little math question. It's saying that the results of two random samples of votes for a proposition are shown above. The samples were selected from the same population, and the margins of error were calculated using the same method. Which of the following is the most appropriate reason that the margin of error for sample A is greater than the margin of error for sample B? Okay, so I'm really just going to focus on this last sentence here. The reason that the margin of error for A is actually higher than B. Well, let's see. If sample A had a smaller number of votes that could not be recorded, margin of error doesn't have to do anything with the number of votes that were not recorded. It has to do with things like sample size. Sample A had a higher percentage of favorable responses. Now, again, that doesn't really correlate. C and D both talk about sample size. Larger sample size would mean we're more certain. Smaller sample size mean we're more uncertain. So I'm going to have to go with D here, saying that sample A had a smaller sample size. That would indicate that the margin of error or the uncertainty is higher. All right. Next one here is a nice little math functions question. For the function f of 0 equals 86, and for each increase in x by 1, the value f of x decreases by 80%. What's the value of f of 2? Okay, so if we have f of 0 equals 86, we want to find f of 2. We're probably going to want to find f of 1 and then f of 2 through that iterative process. So f of 1 is going to be 86 times, it's not going to be times 0.80. We do want to convert this into a decimal, the 80%, but if it decreases by 80%, that means the final value is going to be the original 100% minus the 80%. So it's going to be 20% of what it was by losing 80% of its value. So that's 86 times 0.20. And if we multiply that out, 86 times 0.20 is just 17.2. Now, that's for each increase in x by 1. We want to increase again to x equals 2 and get f of 2, which means I'm just going to take 17.2 and again multiply that by 0.20, and that's going to give us 3.44. So that's all there is for that question. Next one here asks, which expression is equivalent to 256w squared minus 676? Well, this looks like a factoring problem, since all of the answer choices are factored. So what I'm going to do is look at the numbers here. And it looks like I could actually factor the 256w squared as 16w times 16w. So it would make sense for us to put that somewhere in the front, right, as our first terms. We have 16w in these answer choices. Now we just need to figure out the sign on the 26. And so it looks like that leading or the trailing term 26 times 26 will get us back to 676. And you might want to go with this one because it's got the two negatives. But remember, two negatives make a positive, and actually that would cause a positive 676 here. So really we're going to want to go with D, which if you multiply it back out, you'll find that it is exactly that original form that we have up top. All right. This one's saying, in the systems of equations below, A and C are constants. If the system has an infinite number of solutions, that's the keyword, infinite number of solutions, x comma y, what is the value of a? Well, infinite number of solutions, that's going to mean that the two equations are exactly the same. In order for them to be exactly the same, I need all the coefficients to match, but I can't just match 1/2 with a, because notice that this equation is actually scaled up by a certain factor. In this case, it's multiplied by 3. You see the 1/3 y becomes just y. So 1/2 x is 1/3 y equals 1/6. In order to match that up, we have to multiply by 3 to get 3/2 x plus y equals 1/2. Now we're just looking on the value of a, and a is the coefficient on the x term, and that is going to be 3/2. All right, let's move on to this reading question, although it is more like a data analysis. I'm going to skip that reading for now and just go to the question statement. It says the survey indicated the highest level of demand, with 88% of the residents interested in adding more bike paths is in the city's blank. Which choice most effectively uses data from the table to complete the statement? Well, I saw this 88%, so I'm just going to look at the graph. I see 88% here in the southwest region, and that is exactly answer choice A. So quick and easy for that reading question. This next one, I don't want to read the whole thing again, so I'm going to look at just the question statement. Which quotation from a work by a historian would be the most effective evidence for the student to include in support of this claim? Let's see, probably the last sentence has our claim. In a research paper, a student claims that the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and NPR were inspired by the British Broadcasting System, BBC, which had been established in the 1920s. So we want to support that somehow, that Corporation for Public Broadcasting and NPR were inspired by British broadcasting. Let's see, BBC had become a private corporation. Politicians successfully argued to make it public. That doesn't mention anything about those US companies, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting or NPR. BBC had no competition since it held Britain's only broadcasting license, whereas in the United States, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting launched NPR in a broadcasting market already filled with competitors. Well, this one doesn't say anything about the inspiration for creating this the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Congress's embrace of publicly funded broadcasting reflected a common belief among US politicians. This one doesn't talk about anything relating to the BBC. And D says the goal of the BBC was to support British democracy by promoting an informed citizenry, and US legislators believed that ensuring access to high quality programming could do the same for democracy in the United States. That would work. That indicates that those US companies were inspired by the British broadcasting system. All right, moving on to the next question. We have another math question. It says here, if the customer had 3 boxes or 3 small boxes shipped, how many large boxes were shipped? Well, looking at the equation that I have here, I see that A is the number of small boxes and B is the number of large boxes. So if we shipped 3 times 3, 4B equals 25, we'll substitute in 3 for the number of small boxes. Then we'll get 9 plus 4B equals 25, or 4B equals 16, which tells us that B equals to 4. It would be a mistake to look at the coefficients here, but coincidentally, they do line up with the correct answer choices, the correct values for those variables. This next one's pretty quick. If 4x plus 2 equals 12, what is the value of 16x plus 8? I mean, for this one, you could solve it out and solve for the value of x, and you would get something like x equals 5 halves. But there's a quicker way to do this. If you look at the similarities between 4x plus 2 and 16x plus 8, we can just multiply this whole thing by 4 to get to that one. So 4x plus 2 equals 12. If we multiply this whole thing by 4, we're going to get something like 16x plus 8 equals 48. So that's a quick trick that skips you having to solve for x and substituting it back into the second equation, where you could just note that structure of both equations and convert from the first one to the second one. All right, we've got some more math questions for you guys. This one I'll read out because you kind of need all the information. But as we go along, we're going to form the system of equations that will help us solve this. It says a company that provides whale watching tours takes groups of 21 people at a time. The company's revenue is $80 per adult and $60 per child. So I'm going to say A equals adults and C equals children. In total, we can take 21 people at a time. That's the number of adults and children has to sum up to 21. And the revenue is 80A plus 60C. And if the company's revenue for one group was $1,440, how many people in the group were children? Okay, so the revenue was $1,440. These are the two equations that you'll need for the system of equations to solve this problem. You could solve this one with substitution, elimination, or graphing. And since this is the digital SAT, I likely want to go with graphing. Since you have access to the Desmos calculator, what you can do is just set one of your variables into X and the other one to Y, since it doesn't look like you can really plot non-XY variables right now. And I've done that for you guys, and I'll paste in the results real quick to show you what that looks like. If you plot both of those equations will intersect at the point 9, 12. Remember, we're trying to find out how many people in the group were children, and we assign children, variable C, to the Y variable. So that would mean it would be at a Y of 12, and that there were 12 children on this tour. Feel free to use traditional methods like substitution and elimination, but graphing is definitely the quickest way to go for solving a question like this on your digital SAT. All right, this next one is interesting. It says the function h is defined by h of x equals 4x plus 28. The graph has an x-intercept at a, 0, and a y-intercept at 0, b. A and b are constants. What's the value of a plus b? Okay, so the x-intercept is just when y equals 0. Write it like this. X-intercept is when y equals 0. So, or h of x equals 0. Same thing. So we could set 0 equals 4x plus 28. Or in other words, negative 28 equals 4x. And dividing by 4, we'll just get x equals negative 7. That is our a value. Now, for the y-intercept, that's going to be when x is equal to 0. And we actually have that if we plug in h of 0 equals 4 times 0 plus 28. Since it's written in y equals mx plus b form, that intercept's already visible actually, and it's at y equals to 28. Now remember, this is our b value. So in total, A plus B is going to be that -7 plus 28, which is positive 21. Okay, another factoring question. It says that one of the factors of 2x cubed plus 42x squared plus 208x is x plus b, where b is a positive constant. What is the smallest possible value of b? Okay, so this one you can actually solve with graphing as well. I mean, you could factor this out, but I think it's much quicker to graph it, and so I'm going to paste in that graph for you guys to see. When I plot this entire equation out in Desmos, there's 3 intercepts that come up, and I'll show you guys right here what that looks like. There's an intercept at -13, there's one at -8, and there's one at 0. It says here b is a positive constant, positive. But if it's in the form x plus b, it means usually roots we write as x minus the root. So it makes sense that if we're subtracting a negative number like x, for example, x minus -13, that's equal to x plus 13. Or x minus -8, that's equal to x plus 8. Unfortunately, this one is just going to be x minus 0, which is x. So that won't really match the form of this one, because also b has to be a positive, and 0 is neither positive nor negative. But between these two, x plus 13 and x plus 8, they're both in the form x plus b, but of course, the smallest possible value of b is going to be 8. b equals 8, because that one is a smaller factor. And I think this is our last math problem. It says the function f is given. Which table of values represents y equals f of x minus 3? Now, initially, I would jump to graphing this one out as well, but there's something in the answer choices that makes it unnecessary for you to graph this. Notice that all of the x values are always the same at -6, -5, and 4. And coincidentally, or maybe intentionally, those are exactly the x values that are the zeros for this function. X equals -6 would make this equal to 0 and make the function equal to 0. Then, if we're evaluating y equals f of x minus 3, then all those y values would just get shifted down 3. So initially we have the zeros, and then the -3 means we shift down 3. So instead of being at 0, they'll just be at -3. And that's exactly what we see in answer choice B. You can definitely graph this out and check those points if you want, but I can tell you right now it's going to match up with that one. All right, a few more questions here for you guys. This one's a reading question. It says the Cambrian explosion gets its name from the sudden appearance and rapid diversification of animal remains in the fossil record about 541 million years ago during the Cambrian period. Some scientists argue that this blank change in the fossil record might be because of a shift in many organisms to body types that were more likely to be preserved. Which choice completes the text with the most logical and precise word or phrase? Well, looking at the text, I remember seeing some keywords like sudden and rapid that could explain some kind of change. Catastrophic could work, honestly, because we're talking about this Cambrian explosion. But let's keep reading on the answer choices. Elusive doesn't really seem to fit. Like it's not something that we're not sure about, or at least that's not the main focus. Imminent means it's about to happen. Abrupt seems to work the best here. So abrupt just means sudden and rapid. It's actually synonymous to those two. So between A and C, definitely going to go with C to describe this kind of scenario. All right, this next one is a long one, but we can get through it. Let's start by reading the question. We want to find the main idea of the text. Well, I'll probably have to skim this whole thing then. But it says in 1934, there's physicists posited the existence of a crystal consisting of entirely electrons in a honeycomb-like structure. The Wigner crystal was largely conjecture until in 2021, there was an image of one. The researchers trapped electrons between two semiconductors and cooled it, causing the electrons to settle in the crystalline structure. Researchers obtained an impression, a first visual confirmation of the Wigner crystal. Okay, so the main idea here, it seems like they hypothesized this existence, and many years later, we found evidence for it. Researchers have obtained the most definitive evidence to date of the existence of the Wigner crystal. Yeah, that pretty much matches up right away, talking about that evidence. B wasn't really the main focus. It doesn't talk about the Wigner crystal. C wasn't the main focus, right? That was just a detail that was mentioned. D was not the main focus either. That was maybe just a detail that we could infer from the passage. Definitely A is a great general summary of what's going on. Okay. And the last question here, very long question, but we should be able to get through it. Which choice best describes data from the graph that support the researcher's conclusion? Right, so we're going to need to figure out what the researcher's conclusion is and understand the graph at the same time. Well, let's just read through this a little bit. There was a large sample of companies. Economics experts assessed the number of managers from different departments who reported directly to a CEO. According to the researchers, these findings suggest that across the years analyzed, there was a growing interest among CEOs in connecting with more departments in their companies. That seems to make sense, right? The number of people reporting to the CEO has only increased from year to year. If we look at the answer choices, this one says it didn't fluctuate, which doesn't really make sense because it increased. Highest in this period, that is also untrue. It was actually highest in the latest period. Average number of department leaders reporting directly to their CEO was greater than the average number of managers reporting directly to their CEO. That is, that is true, which makes it difficult, but it doesn't talk about the researcher's conclusion. So that would be like a trap answer, right? There was a growing interest among CEOs in connecting with more departments in their companies. That's the claim. There's a growing interest among those CEOs. If we start to make a comparison between the two different types of groups, it doesn't really make sense for that claim. But saying D, the average number of department leaders reporting directly to their CEO rose over the 3 periods studied. Yes, that's true. That's exactly true. That is the general trend, and that suggests that those CEOs had more interest in connecting with those departments. Ooh. Well, that's all the questions I've got for you guys. Don't forget, check out explore.danstestprep.com. I've got newsletter for you guys with a weekly SAT tip, also more free resources and my other social medias. And I'll see you guys next week for next week's Tutor Tuesday.